Attorney General Mark Brnovich, thank you so much for being back on the Sara Carter Show from the great state of Arizona. You have been really causing a firestorm. I'm excited. You're willing to stand up to the Biden administration. So we're going to talk about that and your recent trip to Qatar. But first, thank you for being here with me today. I know you're busy.
Thank you so much, Sarah. Thanks for having me on. Thanks, everyone, for listening.
Oh, yeah. So let's just start off with something that people might not know. You were actually in Qatar. You tell me about that visit. Why were you there? I've been there before. It's unbearably hot, but very interesting.
Yeah, it actually reminds me a lot of Arizona. You know, the summers are obviously very, very hot, and, you know, the winters it can get very, very cool. But I was there as part of a bipartisan delegation through the Attorney General Alliance, and we had visited with the Attorney General of Qatar. We had visited with the Justice Minister, and we met with other officials to discuss not only issues related to law enforcement, but, you know, Qatar is hosting the next World Cup, and, you know, places like Arizona, and my colleague Todd Rokita from Indiana was on this trip as well. And, you know, they're used to hosting the Indy 500 and big events. And so we were talking about how that can impact communities and how law enforcement deals with that, what you can do proactively. And also, you know, when you get that many people coming in from so many different countries, you know, how do you deal with law enforcement issues, you know, issues related with even public drunkenness to human trafficking, which obviously is a big, you know, important issue for all of us, no matter where we live. And anytime you have these global events, Sarah, you get people coming in from all over the world, and that inevitably attracts crooks and con artists and human traffickers. And so we were talking about a lot of the issues that we have in common. And we also had the opportunity to visit, you know, the airbase while we were there, the largest airbase in the Middle East. And we got to visit a refugee center as well. And, you know, obviously Qatar has been in the forefront and at the center of helping the United States and helping those being evacuated from Afghanistan and those fleeing persecution of the Taliban. A lot of them have ended up in Doha. And so we visited a refugee center as well. That's really interesting that you had a chance to go to that air base, Al Udeid Air Base. I was there during the war, and I had to sign all of these disclosure documents like that. I would non-disclosure, that I would not talk about certain things if I've got to go on the base. It was a very secretive base during the war, especially from Iraq through Afghanistan. And I had a lot of just recently people that I do know from Afghanistan that went through Doha on their way to the United States. One of the big issues, and you brought it up, is actually the World Cup and the not just human trafficking, but this idea of having cooperation between our government, between the Qatar government and the United States when it comes to terrorism. We just saw with what happened, you know, at the synagogue, that there are still terrorist organizations operating and terrorists out there that are dead set on targeting the West. I believe that wholeheartedly after all my work in the Middle East and seeing it for myself. What did the Qataris say anything to you about working with the United States in cooperation and trying to maybe continuing to grow that relationship, intelligence relationship, to assist us in maybe targeting, or because I mean, there's a lot of issues with Qatar too, with the, you know, with the Persian Gulf, and you never know exactly what you're dealing with. I mean, were they open to that? Did they talk about that at all? Yeah, well, without a doubt, that is a very rough neighborhood. And as you just indicated, there are people, even in that region, that mean the United States harm. Fortunately for me, everyone that we met with officially, even unofficially, you know, you go to a restaurant or a coffee shop, everyone there seemed to be very receptive and open to the United States. They want to have a great relationship with the United States. It's one of the reasons why a bipartisan group of attorneys general were there meeting with, you know, their justice officials and their attorney general, discussing issues that we have in common, including not only issues related to human trafficking and criminal activity, but also, you know, issues related to money laundering. And so everywhere I went, whether, like I said, it was a government official or, you know, individuals at the coffee shop, everyone wanted to have a good relationship with the United States. And, you know, I've been to other parts of the Middle East throughout my life, and it was good. It was good to see so many people saying that they respected what the United States was doing and that they wanted to maintain their own sovereignty, but they still wanted to work with the United States in a collaborative effort where we have those mutual interests, and whether that's, helping with refugees, whether that's vetting those refugees, or whether it's also helping us in the war on terror and making sure that we are working together collaboratively to go after those that mean us harm.
Absolutely. And I think that for the governments, whether they're monarchies or other established governments in the Persian Gulf, they are very concerned as well about their own security and their own nations, because obviously they're globally connected with Americans living in their countries, working in their countries, and they don't want those issues either. So I think that's awesome that you were there, along with other attorney generals, to kind of build on those relationships. I want to talk to you about, though, the relationship with the Biden administration. And I don't mean to laugh at that.
That was not good.
I don't mean to laugh, because it's crazy. It seems so much work. It seems like you would have a better time going to Qatar and communicating even better with them than you would with, like, let's just say Janet Yellen, right? The Treasury Secretary. She threatened on behalf of the Biden administration to basically withhold funds from Arizona over the difference in your COVID-19 policies and the mandates. You have then threatened to take them to court, right?
Yeah, and Sarah, we have been on the forefront of pushing back against the overreach of the Biden administration. And you and I have talked about how important federalism is in reminding folks that the states created the federal government didn't create the states. And the framers understood that. When Madison wrote in the Federalist Papers, and he described the notion that there's a system of checks and balances, not only between the executive, the legislative, judicial branch, but also the states were supposed to serve as a check on the federal government. Because as government becomes bigger and bigger and bigger, it becomes unresponsive, it becomes inefficient, and it becomes despotic. And that's exactly what the framers were worried about. And so when we take these fights on against the Biden administration, and previous to that, when I was involved in litigation against other federal administrations and federal government programs, it's all about, does the federal government have that authority? And if they do have that authority, are they exercising it properly? And remember, the Constitution is less than 8,000 words, even with amendments. It was designed, the federal government was designed to be a government of limited and delegated powers. And so, unfortunately, we've had for the last 50 years in this country more and more concentration of power in Washington, D.C. And as a result of that, there's more and more infringements on our liberties.
Right.
And so,
but very few states, Attorney General, very few states that are willing to stand up and fight back. I mean, I think I'm surprised at, the amount that have joined you, but we're still seeing so many states where the governors, where their own attorney generals have seceded to the federal government, all of their rights.
Yeah. And the thing is, Sarah, this to me is the kind of checks and balances that demands 50 checks and balances. That is all 50 states. And so, I would remind, the folks that are either Republicans or Democrats in other states that, eventually, once you cede this authority to Washington, D.C., you're never getting it back. And, this latest threat by the Biden administration involves education.
Right.
And, I've raised this question many a time, is that, why do we have the federal government doing so much in when it comes to education? I mean, education was clearly something that was supposed to be left up to the localities and even to the states. It's not a Washington, D.C. problem. And as a result of that, when you let Washington, D.C. in, and then they dangle all this money over the states, you end up with administrations trying to subsidize critical race theory or trying to mandate vaccines and masks in schools. And so that's where you get those unintended consequences. And, we need to be pushing back very strongly on this. And, just last week, Sarah, and the media is not covering this.
Right.
Last week, we had an argument at the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals about Secretary Yellen and the Biden administration saying that states that got COVID relief money can't cut state taxes. And this, once again, is an important concept on federalism. I ask everyone listening, why is it that the federal government can send out $1,400 stimulus checks to people,
right,
but the state of Arizona can't cut taxes by $1,400? And I would submit to you is that's because it's all about a concentration of power in Washington, D.C., and the Biden administration and the progressive left trying to get as many people as possible dependent on that central authority.
So let me ask you this. how serious of a situation are we in right now? Because even when I talked to Attorney General Ken Paxton, he was talking about what was happening here in the state of Texas, my home state now. I mean, there is a real fear that the federal government's, I guess, tentacles have interwoven so deeply into our state system that other than a few states trying to fight back, if the Biden administration got their way, they would take all power.
Yeah, I think this is the progressive left, and, you know, the neo-Marxist dream has always been about that, you know, concentrating that power, and then you'd have that elite, progressives, you know, the people that they think are the smart people basically running the economy and running our lives. And so this is something that's, you know, Marx and, you know, the progressive movement 100 years ago was really into. And we have seen that historically, what it ultimately does is lead to tyranny and oppression. And, you know, so we the people, it's a republic if we can keep it. And that's all about pushing back and decentralizing power and not letting, you know, unelected bureaucrats make economic choices for us, or not letting the Biden administration trying to socialize our economy, nationalize our elections. And now they basically want to, you know, control our local schools. And so I think these are very, very dangerous times. And, you know, not to get too political here, but it's one of the reasons why, you know, I'm running for the Senate. Right. I don't like politics. I think Washington, D.C. is where good ideas go to die, Sarah. But at the end of the day, we need people in D.C. to say, this isn't the job of the federal government. We shouldn't be doing this. And there's not enough people in Washington, D.C. that understand it's not the role of the president and Congress to try to solve every problem in Phoenix, Arizona, or Pine Top, or Sierra Vista, Arizona.
Right. It's the role of the people of that state and those who represent the state in Washington to do that. And well, speaking of which, I know you don't have a lot of time, so I'm going to try to get through all of these questions with you. President Trump was in Arizona last weekend. Looks like he's a big supporter of yours. I mean, I see him out there in photographs with you, and you know, obviously, we are watching a big shift in the GOP right now, too. I mean, the most recent polls show a jump, at least, I think, when I was talking to my producers, he was saying about 14% from where the Democrats were before and to where the GOP is now. I mean, more people moving to the Republican Party, aligning themselves with the Republican Party. I think it was a 5% jump in the most recent poll. Do you see that as a reaction, like a backlash to what's been happening with this Biden administration over the last year? And okay, let's answer that, and then I want to ask you about Trump.
Okay, well, I think that clearly, if you look at what's happened historically, the off-year election favors whatever party is not in power. So there's always a little bit of, you know, wind at your back whenever it comes to being the opposite party of whoever the current president is.
Correct.
So there's always a little bit of that dynamic. But I do think that President Biden has been the worst president in this country since at least Jimmy Carter, and probably the worst president, at least in the last 100 years, maybe in the history of the United States. And so when, you know, hardworking American taxpayers go to the pump and they're saying, oh my goodness, why am I paying so much for gas? And then it's like, oh, wait a minute, the Biden administration is, you know, doing all this green energy crud. They're, you know, canceling pipelines. They're making it harder to get those for America to become energy independent. So that has an impact on the price of fuel. You look at the price of, you know, food, groceries. Anybody that's bought milk or meat lately knows as the prices are rising. So it doesn't matter what the Biden administration and, you know, the pointy-headed eggheads are saying on the East Coast. I mean, people are living with this reality of, you know, rising prices. And then you throw on top of that, Sarah, what's going on with our own security, not only economic security, but our personal security. And whether that's the chaos at our southern border where, as you and I have talked about, more than 2 million people illegally crossed our country this year, and people are being released from prisons and jails that have either been accused or convicted of crimes. And then you just see what's going on, this lawlessness in places like, you know, Chicago and L.A. and San Francisco, all these cities run by the progressive left where people are no longer secure in their own homes. They can't even go shopping without getting robbed.
Right, and
it's a problem.
Well, and it's not just in the cities, Attorney General. It's actually in the airports. TSA, my good friend Jenny Terr, who worked with me for over 3.5 years, is now at the Daily Caller, broke a story at the Daily Caller that the TSA is actually taking people's warrants warrants for their arrest and using it as legitimate identification when they go through airport screening. That's crazy. I wish I could, could we show a warrant? Can an American just walk on an aircraft with a warrant in their hands? Yeah, I'm wanted, by the federal government, but I'm using this warrant to fly on your plane. I mean, this is absolutely insane. Let me ask you this. Trump was in Arizona last weekend. You met with him. What did you guys talk about? What was he focused on most? And did he tell you he was running in 2024? I'm going to throw that one in there at the end.
Podcast, Sarah.
I know, really.
That's going to have to be for the next podcast. I will tell you what.
I thought I would just slip that in, kind of like an interrogator,
Yeah, so you're going to have to waterboard me because the gentleman doesn't kiss and tell. So
exactly. Very good.
I'm fortunate enough to have a lot of conversations with a lot of folks, and so I appreciated our visit.
Oh, good. What did he say? Anything to you that was like that you can talk about publicly? Like, Mark, please run for the Senate.
You start talking about, look, I
so happy you're running for the Senate.
Yeah. Next podcast, we're going to have to talk about all that.
Oh, okay. Next pod. You see, I can't get anything out of him. Listen, President Trump, this guy keeps his lips sealed. Nothing you tell him, it just doesn't come out. It just doesn't. I'm going to ask you about this. What's your reaction right now to Kyrsten Sinema and the filibuster?
Well, first and foremost, the filibuster obviously serves a vital and important role. And, our system, once again, our system of government is designed to protect against the tyranny of the majority. And so one of the ways that is done is through the filibuster process in the U.S. Senate. And, remember, the framers didn't want, this not only tyranny majority, but they didn't want the Senate to move fast. I mean, they wanted it. I think it was Madison that described it as the saucer where the milk or the tea goes to cool. And so, I think it's important to kind of pump the brakes sometimes on some of these radical ideas the Democrats are proposing. And make no mistake about it, they are. I mean, nationalizing elections is an attempt to undermine Brnovich v. DNC, which is the case I argued at the U.S. Supreme Court last year that allows states to enact election integrity measures. And so I think Kyrsten Sinema is kind of crazy to me. I think it's emblematic of the state of the Democratic Party in America today. I mean, Kyrsten Sinema at one point, described herself as a socialist. I mean, she was active in the Green Party. And, now she's the voice of reason in the Democratic Party. I mean, so it's kind of crazy in some ways how far left the Democratic Party has shifted. And I think we all need to take a step back because they're still talking about spending trillions of dollars that we don't have that's going to have a devastating impact on our economy. They're still talking about raising taxes on people. And so, there's still these progressive left ideas. So let's not, turn anyone into saints at this point. But I do think that it was important for her to stand up for those principles. And I think it's important because Arizona has always, I think, had a rich tradition of having senators that aren't afraid to speak their mind. And even when you disagree with them or you agree with them, they're always going to shoot straight with you.
That's a great point. And also her constituents, your constituents, possible future constituents. I want to ask you this because I know you. We've talked so much. I consider you a friend. I consider you somebody who stands for the principles of this nation, and you have integrity. But I'm going to ask you this. Because just taking a step back, there are other Republicans running, looking at vying for the same seat in the Senate. What separates you from the rest of the pack? Why should people be focused on putting their ballot for you come this election?
Well, Sarah, I think that I epitomize Arizona values. I'm not somebody that, is being funded by out-of-state hedge fund billionaires or made a living living off federal subsidies. I grew up here in Arizona. I'm a public school kid. As you know, I'm a first-generation American. And I think that when your family has not just read about history, but lived history, you have this appreciation for freedom and liberty and how it's not something that, we just talk about. It's not something that we pass on to our children through our veins. It's something that must be fought for. And the people that know me here in Arizona know that I'm a fighter. I mean, so a lot of people are out there, they can talk and they can chirp and they can say this, that, and the other thing, but what have they actually done? And I have been on the forefront of every important case in this, over the last few years, last decade. I have, been a consistent rule of law conservative. And I think that people appreciate that. People appreciate the fact that for me, it's always about the rule of law, and it's about doing the right thing in the right way. And I think too often in politics, and I'm not saying anything about anyone else running for any other office, but too often, people get turned off because people say one thing and then they do something else, or they get in and they become drunk with that power in DC because they haven't had that experience of being through fights and being principled. And so I think Arizonans appreciate the fact that I not only talk the talk, but I walk the walk, and I represent, I think, the best of Arizona values.
Yeah, I do too. You know, as far as like when you think about the state and you think about the importance of a republic and why each state needs to have its own independence and someone to fight for it and represent its constituents, I 100% agree with you on that. This is going to lead me to my last question. I don't know if you have time for this. I know I'm making him late, folks. Everybody out there, I can feel it. I feel the tension. But, you know, Democrats are accusing Republicans right now of basically destroying democracy unless legislation is passed to basically federalize all these elections. And in particular, of course, the midterm elections. Biden was saying that the midterms could be illegitimate if his legislation doesn't pass. I'm terrified of that. What is your answer to President Biden in a nutshell about federalizing elections?
First of all, it's a bad idea. It's completely contrary to the U.S. Constitution, which provides that time, place, and manner of elections is to be left up to the states. And, I just literally argued the Brnovich v. DNC case last year. And so, once again, people talk about things, but the case, literally the most important election case in a decade, at least, maybe a generation, is named after me because I stepped into the breach and I was willing to stand up to defend Arizona's election integrity measures, including our limitations on ballot harvesting and out-of-precinct voting. And the left tried to attack those, election integrity measures as being racist and the same things Joe Biden is saying now. And I thought it was important to push back with the facts. And so, for example, on out-of-precinct voting limitations, a majority of states in the District of Columbia have that same limitation. In states like Arizona, we allow nearly a month of early voting. You know how many days they allow in Democratic state like New Jersey? 9. How many do they allow in a Republican state like Georgia? 18. How many do you allow in Biden's home state of Delaware? 0. I mean, and then you look at these states like Arizona and Georgia where we have no excuse absentee balloting, but in the Northeast, Massachusetts, Connecticut, all these states run by the left, you need some bureaucrat to approve whether you're going to vote by mail or not. So
that's right.
All sorts of intellectual inconsistencies with the left. And what we need to do as principled rule of law conservatives is push back with the facts and point out and demonstrate the utter hypocrisy of the Biden administration. And I always tell folks, even young folks when I'm speaking, that we have to be twice as good because so much of the mainstream media has been co-opted by the left. Academia, and I've sued our universities, academia is essentially controlled by the left now.
Correct.
And so we have to make sure that we have all of our facts, that we are consistent in that information, and we have to be willing to stand up for those principles and be willing to defend them literally all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court, as I did, if necessary.
Wow, this is why you're on the show so much. I feel like every time I listen to you, I learn something new, and I'm ready to get out there and fight. You're leading the battalion out there in the right way, and the brigade. That's right, the Brnovich brigade. My husband would be so mad. He'd be like, "Why a battalion? A brigade." Honey, a brigade.
Right.
He's in the military. Anyways,
we play this right. It could be a division at one point.
That's actually true. That's actually true. I know I'm making you late. Thanks so much for being on the show.
You're the best, Sarah.
Thank you. Thank you. I can't wait to have you back on. I can't wait to see what happens between you and Janet Yellen. It'll be very interesting. Maybe I should invite her.
Popcorn.
Should I? Yeah, I'll bring the popcorn. Maybe I should invite her on the show. You think she'd come?
Ooh, we could do a debate.